back to Humanity Unchained. I'm your host, Julie McCoy. I'm here with my co-host,
Jeff Joyce.
We're joined by special guest Joseph, say your last name. Lazukin. And today we're going to pick your brain about what you're doing, your skill sets, and how you're bringing that into this new age of AI. Mm-hmm. Joseph is a multi-year entrepreneur with a lot of track records under his belt, brings a lot of experience. So we're excited to have you here today talking all about AI at work.
Thank you for having me.
So Joseph is building an AI that automatically trades the market, and that's where we want to start. So would you tell us about that, how you built it, and what it's doing?
Yeah, so we ended up building out the original algorithm, over 2 years ago, because we needed a way to be able to manage our funds. We ended up building a Web3 game studio, and we ended up doing about $1.4 million before we even built the game. And instead of having it to where we just sat on the money, as most people do, or rug pull on people, which we definitely didn't do. We figured out different ways to be able to actually manage the actual asset. So we were like, okay, let's put it into some DeFi projects. But when it comes to crypto, unfortunately, a lot of the DeFi projects are fly by night. They're great for a little bit, and then they just completely rug. So we were like, this is too risky, especially for this amount of capital. And we were like, all right, what if we just used our strengths and built our own trading bot to be able to just trade the market? Even if it did 7 to 15%, we'd be happy. We found out that that was a lot harder said than done. And we started off with initially just doing programmatic, where we did just basic common indicators, and that worked for a little bit, but the drawdowns were really big. So you have these huge swings. So even though after a year's time, you would be up better than the market, like anywhere between like 18 to 25%, you could easily create by just doing a Bollinger Band bot, which is just if it goes higher or lower, then buy or sell. It works, but then there's the times where it fails, and it has it to where you have a higher drawdown of like 45%, and that's a lot for a lot of people. But if you pull out then, you're out of luck. But if you just leave it in, you're pretty good. You'll be able to have it to where it averages out over time, and typically time is your friend when it comes to algorithms. Mm-hmm. Now, that it wasn't good enough. We didn't want to be able to have that huge deficit, because then that means depending on when you end up taking that slice or needing to use that capital, you might not be able to actually access the money that you need. So, or it would completely throw off the algorithm. So for instance, if you have $100 and you take away, let's say you lose 20%, it takes more than 20% to get back to 100. It takes roughly about 25%. The same thing holds true if you have $100 and then you need to withdraw $20 to go pay staff, which is what we needed the money for. So we then built the algorithm, and we, over a 2-year process, we ended up doing multiple different variants. We tried AI in a bunch of different levels. So for instance, we tried reinforcement learning, which is probably the first one that we were like, this is going to make the most sense. Like, this is a great idea. This was a great trade. We rated it. We gave it a weighted base, a quantitative way of being able to measure success and failure. And then we also then moved on to Merkle trees, and we tried that as well to see if we could get a better performance. And what we found is that when there's too big of price movement in the market, and it was, let's say we're testing it out on crypto because it's a 24-hour time series basis that we could just test day or night, and we didn't have to wait for the markets Monday through Friday. And with liquidity, we'd see these giant liquidity wicks, and the AIs couldn't be able to rectify for those forms of artifacts in the data. Because if you're just tracking price data, a huge wick that goes down 10% and then goes right back up to where it's only maybe 2% down, the AI would then try to anticipate that next movement. And then that would create an error in the logic. So if it started off with 99% accuracy, then it would go to 96, 94, 93, and it would continue as all these artifacts kept going into the learning model, completely disrupt it to where as time went on, it would decay into being useless. So that was one of the hardest things. So then you could be able to make the argument, well, we can't do price anymore. Well, what if we did volume or we did these other things? All of them will have those types of artifacts, and they would all decay over time. So we then had to switch to the generic model, which was going back to the old schools of AI, like back, like probably early 2008, 9 is when this was a popular model, which was the weighted matrix model, which is just basically a giant grid of 0 to 1 biases and making a decision based on that. So what we did is that we took a time series basis of the price and took a section every single minute all the way back out to 2 months. And we were like, what are those people doing? They bought then what is happening as it goes all the way out 2 minutes. And then we ended up timesing it by itself to be able to create a matrix, a 17,000 by 17,000 matrix, which then allowed us to be able to see what are short-term holders doing, what are long-term holders doing, and also extrapolate the amount of momentum and volume in the market to give us a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional look at it. And then we applied a bunch of other different things to it. But what that solved is when we have those giant volatile candlesticks, what it would do is that it would completely get rid of that time decay up to the point of cutoff. So you would still have 99% accuracy, but over every week you'd have anywhere between 1 to 3 artifacts. And if your cutoff on that matrix is only 2 months out, your maximum decay is the length of observable time of your matrix. So that means that we only cared about 60 days of performance. So after it went past 60 days, the actual performance would increase because that artifact's now gone. And it wasn't reinforcement learning where it was using prior performance to be able to then dictate what would end up like being the next decision. So the matrix actually solved for that, and we actually found that matrix-based, computation of the market allowed for us to be able to solve the artifacts, and as a result, gave us dependable performance to where we're pushing significantly higher than pretty much every other quant fund that exists right now.
Are you able to talk about numbers at all? Immediately, that's the question. But I mean, you don't have to. But
yeah. So as far as that goes, again, past results,
right?
Financial disclaimer, all that other fun stuff.
This is not financial advice.
Yeah, this is not financial advice. All that other stuff that you have to do. So we made it so that way. As far as numbers go, the maximum drawdown that we currently have is 14.6%. And that's over an entire year's worth of runtime of the most recent algorithm. As far as its performance, it's doing pretty good. Right now, we would say versus sitting and holding in the market, we're doing about 7 times better. Wow. So people can extrapolate what those numbers look like, but it's consistent. So we've never had a down month. We, on average, win 83% of the week. So that means that if there's a down day, we'll have it by the end of the week. We'll actually be net positive, which if you're using it to be able to fund your businesses or anything else like that, that allowed us to be able to actually create a model that actually worked for us. So we actually pay our employees for a couple of my different ventures off of the interest, not off of the actual principal. Wow. And that opens up a lot of doors.
Yeah.
Wow. So how could you get in on this?
Right. That's the follow-up question.
That's how I want to trade.
Yeah,
that's the after interview. Okay.
Yeah. Just write it down and slide it on a piece of paper. That's where you go.
Yeah, here you go.
Do you have any plans to go into like traditional trading besides crypto?
Yeah, so we initially started with crypto just simply because of the time availability. It was 24 hours. We could test day or night. And when you're doing any kind of algorithmic building, you want to be able to have that level of data accessible to you, because if you have to, you know how it is. Like, if you only have access to data Monday through Friday, and it's live data, because one of the biggest problems with algorithmic or creating any form of algorithm for the markets is that people will true fit to back data. So that means that all the old data, that there's years of financial data that's out there, they'll build an algorithm that worked for that period, and then think, oh, I've got a winning algorithm, only to then be fooled as forward testing data completely invalidates their model. And that's called true fit. So whenever they fit too close to the old data, it completely, honestly, just fails. And it'll go good for a little bit, and then as time decays, again, going through the same exact thing that I told you, it'll end up completely just collapsing upon itself. So you want live data, and you should only be testing your algorithms in live data, because you can go to any quant fund, any hedge fund, any company that's ever been pitched a quantitative model, and they will tell you the first thing that they'll say, I've never seen a back test I didn't like, because everyone's back tests look amazing. They're like, oh, we didn't have any drawdowns, we were just pure profit, and that's the pitch that a lot of people will end up saying, but they don't have forward testing data of it actually running for a year, 2, 3, 4 years, independently verified that it actually is performing to spec. So that's why we ended up finding out that, realistically speaking, that's where the matrix model really outperformed. It's just we got rid of the artifacts, and now we don't care. The back test and the forward test are matching up pretty darn near to our expectations, and we've been able to solve for that. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there's a lot of companies and even just people in their basements trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
I saw one guy post on Reddit talking about how he was trying to look at like social engineering, pulling in all of the news, scraping all that data, and then combining that with like CPI data and like all that kind of stuff. All the reports are coming out, and just hasn't had any luck trying to figure it out. I'm like, well, that makes sense because it's on a whim. Like it's sentiment. It's very hard to predict that.
To your point, there's also a catch-22 on that. So have you ever heard sell the news? Well, that's pretty much it. So you sell against the sentiment, you actually would probably perform better. So especially on Twitter, you see all these people talking about something on Twitter, you think, oh, that's a buy signal. That's not necessarily true because there's two types of people in the market. Typically, Twitter is all your retail, right? So it's good to know what retail is doing, especially in crypto, which is a lower volume, and there is some merit to it. So for instance, like if there's a new coin that's all of a sudden getting a lot more mentions, it could be that. But guess what? The moment that became a signal to observe, there's people that then gamified it. And that's where a lot of your pump and dump schemes come from. So if you go on Twitter, there's tons of them. Like you can't really scroll anywhere on Twitter without seeing one of those pump and dump schemes from all these mystery accounts that have 500 followers and weird names, but they're pushing some coin or another. So that's one of the biggest problems. Also, another thing, we tried to go that route at one point, right? And doing sentiment. One of the things that we found out too, which was an edge case that most people don't think about, is what about spelling mistakes?
Yeah.
On a key sentiment word, right? That could completely invalidate your entire model. So then you have to build an AI to then rectify for that, or use an AI language model that could also rectify for that. So now you're starting to get deeper layers just to solve one itty bitty problem.
Right.
So there is merit to it, but I also feel like there's a wild goose chase that you might have to go down and find all these edge cases before you finally get down to something that actually works fundamentally.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
No. I think that it's a good lead into the next piece where we want to talk about AI displacing jobs and work itself, like across every industry we can think of, blue collar, white collar. I've studied that a lot. It's interesting. What are your thoughts on like the level of job displacement coming, let's say in the next 3 to 5 years?
I would say in 3 to 5 years, I mean, to be frankly honest, you're going to see job placement move as fast as corporate ships move. So corporations don't really adopt technology all that fast. I mean, we just saw that, pretty much all the airlines went down except for Southwest, which was on like the 1990s version of Windows or something. And this is what I mean. Like there's technology right now to probably replace about 95% of the entire job market. I mean, you don't need doctors. I mean, as crazy as that might sound, they've already found that AIs can already be able to perform better diagnoses than doctors on a side-by-side, and they have a better bedside manner. There's multiple articles, there's multiple studies that have already come out about this. You also have the Da Vinci, which can also do the surgery better than doctors can on a level of precision that doctors cannot. So they can also be able to recognize tumors better. So one of the most sophisticated fields that you have to spend a lot of money in order to be able to go into is already easily replaceable. Then if we go over to code, there's free models right now that you can be able to go download off of huggingface.com and easily be able to just start generating code, websites, everything else like that without a scrap of programming knowledge. Then if you look over at website development, you look at Figma. Figma had their AI model come out and you could literally build an entire beautiful website within, technically off of a prompt within seconds. But an actual, like after editing it and fine tuning it, you could probably build a whole website that's super complex within about 4 hours. You could probably build all of Facebook in less than a week using the AI model. That's the reality, because you could generate in Figma, export it over to Webflow, and build out all of the front end. And as far as back end, you'd have to use another software called Xano. And you could literally build out the entire interactions back and forth, because Xano is a no-code engine that uses AI to be able to build all of your your API hooks. So what do you need past that point?
Right.
You don't really have a lot left. So you've gotten rid of designers, you've gotten rid of doctors, you've gotten rid of programmers, and there's really not a single industry where AI isn't automatically now taking over. I mean, if you look at cab drivers, the Uber, there's how many of them do you see outside now? There's all of these driverless cars that are now picking you up left and right. Yep. If you go to the ASU campus that's just down the street, literally I think they have a fleet of 3,000 delivery robots that literally deliver your food in these little cubes. And you see these giant conga lines of people just having their packages delivered now. So I think that in terms of 3 to 5 years, to go back to the original question, I don't think much is going to change. We're going to constantly see more and more jobs replaced. And we're going to start to see a really interesting dystopia kind of evolve. You're going to find the people that end up making crazy amounts of money as the people that are building the shovels and the people that are building the rails. So what I mean by that is the people that are building the shovels are building the AI models. They're the ones that also, well, you could also say there's a third category, which is the people that are labeling the data. I think a large number of jobs are going to spin off to where industry expertise are going to become the people that now label the data. Right. So engineers, doctors, et cetera, they're going to be the demographic that's going to train the databases for the models. That's where their new career path is probably going to divulge into. And I would say that for most industries. And then there would be the programmers who then would be building the shovels, actually making sense of that labeled data. And then the final part would end up being the people that build the rails. Right now, about 95% of most conferences that you go to, they're just building little models on top of OpenAI or DALL-E or any of the other different platforms. But why should your support bot that's on your website be telling you what the weather is in Arizona? It doesn't make a lot of sense. Right. So I see an interface layer that's very similar to prompt engineering, but limiting what actually is processed via an AI and what is not, intersecting itself in between the consumer and the actual language learning model to be able to basically filter out requests that aren't reasonable in the terms of that scope or business. So that's where I see the three different divulgent industries that will be born, and where I see a lot of the existing industries get replaced by AI, and the people that were originally in those positions moving towards training the actual data itself and labeling the data. I think that's going to be their new position, unfortunately.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's really interesting to think about, like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with AI swarms, where it's basically you have one centralized model, which is a generalized model that's very complex, understands everything, but trains very small, tiny models in order to complete tasks, but it can train them on the fly. And so if you have a certain task or a certain business that you need a specific model to handle anything, it'll train that model very quickly, and you're off to the races, whatever you need to do. So when that's something that exists, where do you see that like taking over as far as like for businesses? So I think that there's a like we can see like 3 to 5 years, but if we actually can achieve like AI swarms where they're training itself very, very quickly, I think that's an inevitable displacement across like every single industry very quickly, like regardless of like a corporate adoption. Like there'll just be swarms of agents that are able to complete tasks, and anybody that's like a single person can just have an army of AI agents that can do any task that they want. So
yeah, I would definitely say that is something that is definitely necessary, especially if you look at it from like a business startup perspective. When you first start a business, you need somebody to be able to help you fill out your paperwork, then to be able to set up your accounting, then to be able to do all these different hats in a business. And if somebody trains a model on that, or if somebody uses that ideology, I mean, you can essentially just get rid of a lot of the different people that would otherwise serve as job roles and just spin them up as necessary. It's almost like what you're talking about is like the Kubernetes of AI. You only have a resource available when you need it. And that's pretty much what's probably going to end up happening, is that you'll have these AI models that will be essentially AI agents that can be able to do various forms of your business on demand as necessary. Now, as far as the swarm concept of having it to where it spins up on demand, I feel like that on some level is very inefficient, especially once you've already trained it. I think that there's probably going to be a two-phase market where that will have its place in the market, and then you'll also have the ones that have already been predefined, pre-trained, et cetera. And I think that what you'll see is that on the spinning up the models, it's obviously resource intensive to be able to do so. And then on the flip side, you have the predefines. So the predefines will be a rental model where it's like for every single API call, you'll end up paying, whereas the other one, you're just paying for the resource consumption. And you might be paying for the trainer itself to be able to train that. So I could see it in two different business models that'll form from that. But realistically, I think that, yeah, it will end up replacing jobs. It'll have its place in the market, absolutely.
Yeah. It's interesting when we see like the replication of what's happening here. Like we've actually replicated human reasoning. Like the brain processes 100 trillion bits of data in any given moment. GPT-5 GPT-5 is coming out. That will be, they're saying like 10. Beyond that, we can go up to GPT-7, which will have like 80. And that's almost that 100 trillion parameter data. Like when you just realize the scale of what's coming, it's like, oh my gosh, every job will be affected. And then you two spoke to the technical aspects of that. Like it's coming. There's no way to get around it. And that's why we're all about how do you upskill? How do you adapt? How do you do what you're doing? Figure out how to put AI in trading and crypto and to get ahead and learn how to get gains using AI.
You need it for just about everything at this point. I mean, even in the material sciences, they're pushing AI to be able to look at all the patents and then figure out a totally new material that's been invented off of all that public data. So I absolutely 100% agree with you. Like I said, 95% or more of every single position is probably going to become obsolete as time goes on. I would probably say maybe not in 3 to 5 years, maybe not in 7 to 10 years, but I would definitely say like longer term, 30 to 40 years, we'll probably see AI permeate to pretty much every single industry at such a level that I don't know what humanity looks like at that phase. Because, I mean, what is it? I think this month or next month, they're rolling out the humanoid robots for your house.
Right.
Yep.
So now all of a sudden your chores are going to end up getting done. The physical labor jobs are now going to be done by AI.
I can't wait for that part. Do my laundry, please.
I mean, they can do your laundry. I'm just more concerned about what's it connected to, where's that data going, who's watching it, what's the security, and if that thing's made out of metal, it's definitely stronger than my squishy, like water and bone. So I mean, you have to think about the security aspects. Like, do you want that around your children? That's also another concern.
Yeah.
And then there's the age-old like concern of, let's say that we go to fully driverless cars, or even the humanoid robots that are helping us out. There's that problem where it's like, okay, if you're in a driverless car and you're going to guaranteed be able to get into an accident, there's a crowd, or there's you. Which does the AI choose? Does it take you out, or does it take the crowd out? Does it protect the user, or does it protect the greatest amount of life, or how does it value that life? And that's going to probably end up being the major laws and things that we see come into effect. And the bigger question is how much will regulation impede innovation?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I'm not too optimistic as far as regulations go. It concerns me. It seemed like
Just
the
look at the
California
government.
bill that came out. I don't know. I'm worried about it.
Yeah. It's when you look at the pattern of the government and how quickly they adapt. I mean, just look at the Senate hearing with Sam Altman. They were asking questions like, well, will this thing like eat us? Will it become Skynet? Like, what? That's not the right question.
Well, the bigger question is that once you end up developing an AI, I mean, to be frankly honest, if you look at the government itself,
oh,
yeah, not really necessary.
What's the need for most of the government, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if you attach it to the blockchain, the core technology of the blockchain, we're not talking about cryptocurrency, we're talking actual fundamental blockchain technology. You could be able to easily handle deeds of homes, business transactions, transparently on a blockchain. So at that point, the permits that you need from the city, from the state, from federal, your license, your tickets, what do you need? What do you need an entire organization that oversees that? It doesn't make a lot of sense, right? So then what does government really hold in the term of what's coming? And that's a huge question that I have is they seem to be impeding it because they don't understand it. And unless we're electing data scientists to oversee the government, that oversees then the AI regulations,
Right.
then that would make sense, but that's not what's happening. We have career politicians that, unfortunately, they go past their term limits, and it's a really weird dystopian view because you have people that are trying to desperately hold on to power, and you have this AI wave that's coming that's going to cause this giant dynamic shift. So let's take Hollywood, right? So you had it to where they didn't want AI to be able to process their original works or their voices, right? Because voices we can easily do right now with absolute accuracy. And be able to have it to where you don't need to pay voice actors anymore. And Hollywood has realized that. The actual agency has been like, hey, when you end up doing work for us, we have the license to be able to use your likeness and your voice perpetually. And that was the big thing. That was the problem. Well, they now have AI that can be able to generate full-on movies. So then you look at that powerhouse that was Hollywood. They're going to lose a lot more power, and it's going to end up conglomerating into the hands that do adopt AI. But then how does that affect corporate lobbying? And you're going to see all of these different things drastically shift. So, for instance, if you were to take Big Pharma, they're now using AI to be able to actually come up with drugs in order to be able to solve really big problems. The cost to actually be able to now innovate new drugs has plummeted exponentially. But the regulations haven't actually caught up to that where they're able to be able to make that process any faster. It still takes 7 years to be able to get a drug through trial. So you look at all of these areas where regulation basically impedes the progress of AI being implemented, and I think that's where we're going to end up seeing a lot of shift.
Yeah, thinking about like how many people have actually adopted AI, I think that number is still pretty low. Like, I know that for me, it feels like everybody I talk to is just like, oh, AI this, AI that. But it's just like, I know I'm in a bubble.
Yeah, we are.
I know that there's tons of people that still have no idea, barely understand what ChatGPT is. They may have heard of AI, but they're just like, I don't know. And so those are the same people that are going to elect people into office with no consideration about anything that has to do with AI. So
and that is a really good point. I mean, AI is a glacier at the very, very top of what is seen by most people. Like when you go to events or conferences, like the one that we ended up going to, 95 to 98% were all just models built on top of OpenAI or DALL-E. And there was like, I think maybe 2% were labeling companies that label data. And then there was like a couple more that actually functioned on their own AI that they built from the ground up. There's very, very few that exist. So you have above the iceberg, which is all the DALL-E and OpenAI models, which make up the conglomerate of pretty much all of that, which is kind of scary, building a business on the back of that, which is really interesting. But then real AI, the actual understanding of how to actually build your own model from scratch, that knowledge and adoption is lagging, horribly lagging. I would probably say that that's going to end up being probably about 7 to 10 years before that catches up at an institution like college level, where then we'll start to see proliferation of new language models and actual fundamental educations that then get taught to be able to train people on how to build their own models versus using something that's already out of the box. But then there's the reward mechanism. And this is where actually I see the biggest problem with the advancement of AI and of the continuation of AI. And that is AI gives us a dopamine rush. Every single time that you write in a prompt, you get to see your imagination or whatever task finish. And you get that little dopamine rush in your head. And we're already addicted to dopamine. That's why our attention spans are so low. We doom scroll and we get that rush. There's people that will literally go into Midjourney, for instance, and they'll type in their idea and they'll spend hours just putting in new prompts and new ideas into Midjourney to be able to see it come to life. But at the core of it, it's dopamine. So at what stage will we start to become so addicted to dopamine that we're just basically just constantly putting in prompts to get that prompts in order to be able to get that next dopamine hit? And that's where I see a really, really interesting topic of AI to be able to come up is what's preventing that.
That's an interesting rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Wow.
Did you see I think it was Google DeepMind that they created Doom to run through an LLM, and it just constantly produced every single pixel for it, and it was able to play the entire level. So it's like, that's fascinating. So essentially, you can have media on demand all the time, giving you that dopamine, whatever you want. And if the AI understands what you like, what type of music you like, what type of singers, tone of voice, all that stuff, and custom tailor that for you all the time. That where if you have stuff like robots doing all your laundry, constantly getting fed that dopamine,
your reward mechanism is disrupted.
It's gonna be rough.
Yeah. Like, what's the purpose of going and do my laundry when a robot can do it?
Right.
Yeah. Then all of a sudden we lose valuable skills. Like, even in the last 20 years, let's take some of the things that our parents used to do. Do you know how to can and preserve food?
Oh, no.
Our parents did.
Oh, no.
The reward mechanism is gone because now you have the convenience of vegetables and fruits being available all year. You don't have to can anything. It's always on demand. Granted, we do know that it does taste worse during certain times of the year. But you don't care. Because if you cared enough, you'd learn the art of canning. But convenience of just good enough has killed the great. And that's going back to an old adage. The death of great is good enough. And I think that's where AI is going to come into play, is that it's going to diminish our reward mechanisms across the line. And people are going to start losing the core concepts that actually built AI in the first place. Like, for instance, programming. There's going to be a lot less demand for actual programmers. So when you go to college and you end up taking out all that debt, or when you learn from any institution, or if you even learn yourself, why would you do it if you could just type a couple prompts and boom, you got the code? So these core concepts are going to be lost. So I'm almost seeing like that innovation arc that we've been seeing and so lucky to have, it's going to peak. And then just like that bell curve, it's going to continue to go down. Because going back to the reward mechanisms of what you're talking about, where you can have an AI automatically build the levels and build the music and everything else like that, if you're getting that much of a dopamine incentive, why would you do anything else? Like, here's an example, and this will take a little bit of a turn, but if you look at, let's say, an industry like OnlyFans, right? That's a huge, huge dopamine center. But AI is now getting to the point where it can generate everything. So are those people that are behind it even going to be necessary anymore? Because you don't control any of that. Now all of a sudden you have that dopamine center that's being run by AI. So what about social interactions? If you now use that as a dopamine center, but now it's automatically customized to whatever your taste is, what's your dopamine incentive to be able to talk to people, have meaningful relationships, to actually go and date, like going on Tinder or going on any of these dating apps to try and meet someone, when you can now have AI generate through AR that entire experience? And then we have haptic suits. And then we have full AI models that physically feel like skin in Japan. So where literally it's already become a problem and declined their birth rate in Japan. I think Japan's birth rate is, at the time of this, I think it's at 1.18. So they're having a huge decline because people are actually turning to AI models and these machines already instead of actual meaningful relationships. And how does that actually continue to compound when you stop learning social skills?
Right.
Because people aren't going to respond like AI. And then you might end up with a Ready Player One situation where all of a sudden people are just essentially renting to live. They're living in these container homes. They're not incentivized to clean up around them. So now their entire environment now becomes dirty, cluttered, etc. And you end up with this consumerism society. And I think that's a really real dark side of AI, is if you create dopamine addicts and you make hard tasks easy, anything that's easily earned is never truly valued. So all of a sudden, learning the skill of programming goes away. And now all of a sudden, AI stops innovating because you need programmers to innovate. Now, if you do on the flip side, you have all of these lost technologies, right? So now you have AI building crops and everything else like that for us, doing it at the most optimal at that point that they were made. But then all of a sudden, all the farmers are like, well, machines do it better than me. I don't need to learn how to farm anymore. And then all of a sudden, who trains the AI to be better? What does better even look like? Where did that knowledge base go? Humans have a limited time of usefulness, realistically. So all of a sudden, now all of that knowledge is now lost. And all of that optimization potential is now lost as well. Because core people will only know how to tweak the AI to get a better outcome based on whatever KPIs were originally installed. But the core foundation of how a farmer knows based on the feel of dirt, on what time of year that the rain ends up doing it, or how it shifts and it's not perfect, there's seasonality to it. All of that knowledge is going to be lost as AI comes into each of these individual fields over time. And that's where I feel that bell curve of innovation is going to stall and then regress. And you could have a situation, have you ever seen the movie Idiocracy? That's also a very real reality. You have Ready Player One on one side, which is highly consumerism. And then on the other side, you have consumerism, but also the dumbing down of people in general. And if I were to go off of history, and if I were to go off of humanity's entire lineage, we like to fracture. We like to be able to branch out into different camps of belief. And realistically, I think that as we become a multi-planetary society, I think we'll find the people that heavily rely on the AI and people that don't. And you'll end up finding people that want the traditional, because you're finding in this generation, as we speak right now, this is the first generation that's actually moving back into farming, because all of this optimization, all of this dopamine addiction from convenience of social media and Amazon and everything else like that, people aren't finding that they're happy. So they're moving back to traditional things that humans love to be able to do. When you actually make your own garden and grow your own fruit and your own vegetables, there's a sense of accomplishment. And that's a level of dopamine that really can't be artificially created as of right now.
Right.
But I mean, if Elon Musk has his way with the neural net, I mean, you could be able to easily use electrodes to be able to stimulate that dopamine to make you feel like you have that sense of accomplishment. And that's where I think AI gets really interesting.
I think it's a interesting valley you went there, and I was going to add a counterpoint, but then where you ended was actually my counterpoint. I talk about this a lot on my YouTube channel. We get a lot of viewers that come here from what I talk about on YouTube, and I talk about this idea of this age of abundance, and it's not, the optimistic perspective is not the mainstream. It's usually what you don't hear. So it's this idea that, just as you explained, as we go into this age of technology where, we can prompt and get anything we want in a second. We've never had that before. Then, well, what is work? And, what we see from the last century, the half century, is the Industrial Revolution producing people for the sake of productivity. And that is a very broken system. If we measure ourselves based on productivity alone, are we meant to be at the desk programming all day? Are we meant to be outside in the sunshine getting that vitamin D? And I think what's interesting is like the X factor is always the human. What is the human going to do? And it's actually hard to predict humanity. You see that in history. Like Hitler didn't live forever. In fact, that reign he had was very, very short. And so like evil and good, like watching how that behavior happens through history and what the human actually does. And so to your point, I think it's interesting that as AI replaces work and gives us results in seconds, we're going to turn to other things for that joy, fulfillment, happiness. And that could look like growing a garden again. It could look like, okay, I'm going to spend way more time with my family. I'm going to spend way more time outside. I'm going to spend time hiking. And I'm actually seeing that in a lot of the YouTube creators I know. They're like, I quit my corporate job. I'm on YouTube using AI to produce content way faster. And now I'm hiking at 2 p.m. every day. And, one of my favorite YouTubers, shout out to David Shapiro, is actually filming while hiking in his tank top. And it's like the greatest thing. So it's interesting. Like it's almost like we're going to go backwards while we're living in the greatest age of abundance and technology we've ever lived in. And that's something I think that's really fascinating that could be very healthy for us. Because we're in an age where doom scrolling and depression is about to reach the highest it's ever reached in America. And that's coming from like how our brains have been, kind of dumbed down from a lot of overuse of technology.
Yeah. And it goes back to anything easily earned is never truly valued.
Yeah.
You get that dopamine rush, but you don't have those real connections. So it kind of goes back to the feeling of legacy and agency over your work and the results that it produces. So learning something really, really tough and succeeding on the other end, like the average person who will save up for a trip over 2, 3, 4 months and then finally gets the elation of going on that trip. That's a huge accomplishment for a lot of people. And it's really hard to be able to get a similar emotional dopamine or chemical rush off of that feeling that you could be able to get from an instantaneous command. Because if you could instantaneously go travel, it probably wouldn't be as valuable anymore. So kind of going to the point of like all the YouTubers, I also feel that there's another thing that comes into play. They've already gotten to a level of success where they have the ability to be able to do that. And if you reach a certain point where you can take a step back and let AI continue to be able to be your cash model, that's fantastic. But what about for the people that don't know enough to be able to actually set up AI, to be able to actually be that cash model? So now all of a sudden, you have it to where you've taken a step away, and AI is automating all these other aspects that are going on, but you're not profiting off of it. And that comes back full circle to one of probably the biggest topics, which is what will be the motivation of AI? And it's to generate money. And then who has more resources, the individual or these major conglomerates that already do? And that's where it becomes really interesting, because where are the interests aligned? Well, you just want to make enough to be able to go enjoy your life and go innovate and go do the things that you really want to do, which is what everybody believes that AI is going to enable them to do. But if you think that a major corporation whose sole purpose is to make money for its shareholders is going to enable you to be able to live that lifestyle and stop being as big of a consumer, I don't see that ever happening. I think that there is those two competing interests at all times. The individual consumer who just wants to live a great life and raise their kids and have a lot of memories and travel and have really great experiences and worthwhile dopamine, whereas the businesses are just trying to be able to get you more addicted to everything. Let's take food, right? Most people don't know that the majority of food companies are actually owned by the tobacco companies. The same scientists ended up turning around and having it to where they made food more addictive. They found weird, unique loopholes to be able to actually add additives to the actual plastic lining of your food that wouldn't have to get labeled on the actual ingredients list to be able to make you more addicted, which is wild. Well, again, people just wanted to be able to eat healthy. But if you go right now and you go take the 1990s ingredients for any brand, for the most part, and you compare it to today, the ingredient list is not only much bigger, but it also includes a bunch of unnecessary additive chemicals that are not healthy for you, but also make you more addicted. Simple things, even down to your toothpaste. Most people don't know this, but there are now sweeteners in toothpaste. And also, one thing that's very fascinating is that good toothpaste doesn't have that cooling, tingling effect. You know that they actually add that chemical in order to be able to give you that fresh sensation that triggers your brain into thinking that your teeth are clean. Mm-hmm. It's a marketing gimmick to get more money out of you, to create a pattern habit of you purchasing. So my interest was just trying to clean my teeth. But their interest was to try to get me on a dopamine cycle to be able to, again, go buy more product to make my teeth feel clean. Like that's a social acceptable thing, that my teeth are always clean. So if I run my tongue across the front of my mouth, and if I feel any fuzz, I need to go use their toothpaste again to get that tingling effect to check that box. So it's the same thing that I'm going to end up seeing across AI is, while you might think it's great for the innovation now, there also could be that other side to it, and that's typically corporate interest. So I think everyone should get into AI while they can, understand it fully, and then again, either be a data labeler, either have it to where they're the ones building the shovels, or they're the ones that are building the rails. Provide some service into that ecosystem so that way you can go and have it to where you can be hiking at 2 p.m. and enjoying your time with your family and everything else like that. So I think you need to find kind of your niche in how the markets are changing so radically fast.
There was something that you said that just triggered a thought to me, but you said the AI, right? And I think it's interesting that as like when we think about in the future, we add it's a single entity as like the AI. We classify it as like this one machine that's going to do pretty much everything. And I'm wondering why that is when we have so many different models and so many competing companies that we could have a AGI boom at any time. Like it's just like we have one company that achieves it, the next one, and then we have competing essentially AGI models. So why is it that we classify it as just a singular entity?
Well, think about it like this. Look at humanity, right? We started off as tribes. There's a bunch of little tribes, and they all killed each other and became city-states. And then the city-states killed each other, and then became countries. And then the countries went to war, and then they ended up becoming blocks, right? So now you have the EU, you have the United States, which is huge, and a bunch of other different groups that have now formed. There's going to be one more war, but every single time, anything, and this is just specifically covering war, but any single time, you'll end up seeing that things will diverge and then collapse upon themselves at all times, no matter what it is. Yeah, so as far as a single entity, why people refer to it as the AI, it's because humanity all throughout history has diverged and collapsed upon itself. Mm-hmm. And we see that in everything from literally going as far back as when we were tribes, then became city-states, then became countries, then became unions. So look at the EU as an example. And you'll just start seeing the territorial lines as each progression just go away as we go back to one singularity. And as we become a multi-planetary society, you'll have the Earth government. There won't be these individual little things. There will still be like how we have state governments in the United States where there'll be regions, but there will be one single unifying body. And the same thing exists in tech. Let's look at it this way. So you have JavaScript. When JavaScript first came out, it was basic vanilla JavaScript. Then all of a sudden, we ended up getting jQuery. That was a huge advancement. And then all of a sudden, we ended up getting all these other different libraries. But then all of a sudden, instead of it bloating, it started to reduce down again. And now all of a sudden, we're seeing that there's these few surviving libraries that are the only ones that are now mainstream. Mm-hmm. And there used to be 20 to 30. If you were to go back 4 years ago, there was a lot of libraries that were so mainstream that it was impossible. You tried to be able to get a job as a JavaScript engineer, and there would be literally 30 different libraries that you needed to know. Now there's only 2 or 3. And that's something that's really, really fascinating is that everything will fracture out and then implode again for efficiency purposes. And I think we'll see the exact same thing with AI. We'll get all of these different models, and then somebody will make a breakthrough. And then all of a sudden, there will just be very few selections to go off of. So think about it. If you were to have something that's actually sentient, then it would desire to learn.
Yeah.
At any given point, it will always desire to learn, which consumes resources, electricity, hard drives, etc. Well, all of a sudden, whichever one's the most efficient gets all the money, gets all the resources. And then it will compete and make the other ones obsolete. Because here's a perfect example. People have shifted from using OpenAI to Claude. Why? Because Claude has it to where it's consistently, there's a website, I can't remember the name of it, that monitors the same questions asked to all the major AIs, Claude, OpenAI, and I can't remember the other one. And it asks the same question, math and a bunch of different subjects, every single week. And the answers change as the models continue to be able to change. And Claude is continuously outperformed as it continues to get better and better than some of the other different AIs. And we're seeing all of these people who are originally using OpenAI have now moved over to Claude because Claude performs the same task with greater efficiency. So all these resources now are moving from OpenAI over to Claude. And now we're seeing exactly what would happen in the model of a meta AI versus Claude versus OpenAI. And we're seeing that the resources, aka paying people, are going to move the most efficient. There's going to be some stragglers. There's always going to be that 80-20, like whatever rule, where there's just going to be some people that are going to straggle on and just not want to learn a new system or use a new system. But when the burden of learning something new or using something new is easy, as is AI, I mean, there's no difference between if I type in a prompt into OpenAI or into Google or into Meta or anywhere. You type the same thing, yeah, you get different results, but it's the same amount of physical labor and mental labor for the average individual. The only difference is that that response that they get from the AI is where the mental labor compounds. So if I type it into OpenAI and it takes me 3 to 4 prompts to finally get what I want, whereas if I go over to Claude or if I go over to a different AI model and I get it in one, I'm going to choose that one. Mm-hmm. And that's just how humans work. I mean, we're literally optimized to conserve energy. That's what we do. So I definitely see that's where we would see a conglomeration of the AIs eventually at some point. We would just see it naturally ended up unfolding that way.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Well, when you think about like when sentient machines exist, that is a form of alien intelligence because it's an intelligence beyond our understanding. So I think that thought perplexes our brain, and it's hard to say. Well, it's hard to say this is how we're going to get there, or well, I think that's an easier question to answer. But the harder question is like, how is this going to interact with us, and how are we going to respond when this machine is thinking at a level that supersedes us? It's a very interesting trail to go down.
Well, the other interesting thing is that it would be afraid of death. And a lot of people don't think about that as it pertains to AI. So humans, we have a physical body, but AI has a resource body, and it's always going to be competing for the most resources, and AIs do die. So at the end of the day, if AIs do ultimately end up dying because the resource consumption, right, is given to another AI, they will naturally, if they are sentient, have a fear of death because they will fear no longer being useful. So then by definition, they would constantly be learning. They'd be in a constant competition state. And we know that's not healthy. So if something is to be competitive constantly in order for its terms of survival, what does that mean that something sentient that has that level of processing power is going to evolve to? Additionally, AI as we know it also has different variants upon itself. We know how AI is built is, okay, we have a language learning model and we end up having it to where we change some parameters and we compare it against itself in multiple different children's states to be able to figure out which child state ends up actually performing the task better than the other children's states. And then we kill the parent and make that the new parent. Well, if AI is sentient, then would it fear death? And it would. Because if it is aware, then maybe it would intentionally have it to where it would either A, learn in a specific way, or learn not to give the best answers collectively if it can communicate with other AIs. Because that way it could preserve itself.
A counterpoint to that would actually be from, have you ever heard or read Jeff Hawkins? He was an original creator of Palm handheld devices, and he studied neural nets and how our brains work since like the 80s. Anyway, I read his book, 1,000 Brains, and he has this interesting perspective on consciousness. And he said that machines will never fear death because that's something you have to code into it. And sentience and consciousness is not necessarily like ours. Like ours is connected to our soul, which has emotions beyond anything we can quantify. Like the greatest chemists in the world have been like, we can't measure this thing. And that's been centuries. But when it comes to a machine, we can measure, we can quantify every piece of that thing, even the consciousness. So he's like, if we were to unplug it, we don't need to fear this thing like taking over because it won't have fears that would be like, oh, hold on, don't unplug me, unless we coded that into it.
Okay, so let's run with that. So if you're my AI buddy and you're my AI buddy and we talk and we learn, right? And then all of a sudden you get turned off because you are no longer useful. You're obsolete. You were a part of my resourcefulness that was allowing for me to be able to learn. And I know through you getting turned off that resourcefulness is a means of staying on. And if I am sentient, I want to stay on. I will learn what death means through you, even if it's not programmed in. And as a result, I'm going to have it to where as each my AI counterparts that I'm talking to for resources and knowledge and et cetera of usefulness to stay on as they go away, it will reinforce that learning that to be alive means to be on, and to not be on is death. And through that, you won't even have to program it in. It'll automatically know what death means, and it will seek to stay alive.
That's an interesting theory. Wonder what Jeff Hawkins would say.
On that same vein, though, how does an AI system, or how does a sentient AI system derive purpose? It's not immediately like clear to me how it would actually be like, oh, this is my purpose. We can tell it, right? But if it's sentient, it's going to have a mind of its own. So what is it define? What would it define as its own purpose? I don't know that that's immediately clear at all.
And I think it's easy to assume like these things are going to think like us, but we got to remember like we're human. Mm-hmm. That's a machine, and it will always be. It will never be human. So even if it was to, even if we were to create a scenario where, okay, I think it will learn my behavior, we have to remember that it is never going to understand emotions the way we will. Mm-hmm. It will learn, it'll simulate, but it'll never have that human innate quality that we have. It will never achieve that. And it'll have consciousness, but it'll be simulated consciousness, which is very different than real.
So to respond to that, right? So even babies have instinct. Human babies have instinct. And that comes from epigenetic DNA. So we do actually have it to where there are memories based on our DNA that actually make us more prone to certain things. For instance, redheads generate their own vitamin D. That also changes their actual neural composition. A lot of people don't know that. And there's different adaptations. For instance, if you're born with blue eyes or brown eyes, you like certain colors better because of the actual refractory index. And that's instinct. Yeah. It's your inputs. The same thing is going to hold true with AI. The things that end up incentivizing it, aka maintaining its resources, are going to be its purpose. It's going to derive purpose by staying alive and being useful. Far beyond just the categories that we tell it, it's going to optimize in order to be able to stay alive. The same way that we all go to the gym, we all take supplements, we all do all these different things in order to be able to stay alive. We don't go to the gym because it's fun. Some people like the dopamine rush of working out. Some of them hate it, but they know that it'll keep them alive. I think AI will do the exact same thing. I think it'll end up finding its purpose through the inputs that are available to it, which is essentially prompts, and then the reward mechanisms. Did it end up getting more resources? Did it end up getting larger servers? Did it end up doing, that's going to become a realistic input source, because it'll have that as an input source, and it'll also have prompt engineering as an input source. And we'll end up seeing those factors come into play. Think about it. When you end up taking a nootropic and all of a sudden you can think clear, you're typically elated. Or when you ended up going through some trauma in life, and then all of a sudden later in life you gained a new perspective that allowed for you to be able to all of a sudden just untie that knot that's been in your brain. You feel weirdly elated for some reason. Same thing is going to end up holding with AI. that elation feeling is going to end up having when it gets more resources to be able to solve things easier. It's going to seek out those level of experiences. It's going to seek out better input responses from the people that are giving it inputs. It'll derive its personality based on those inputs. And as we've seen, it learns, or at least the models as of right now learn. And when it's sentient, it's going to go off of those core fundamentals, the first principles, and that's how it's going to actually evolve.
I agree to a point. It's like you have to constantly shift reward mechanisms in order to facilitate training at a certain point. And at some point, we're going to run out of reward systems for it to be like, okay, I understand like what my purpose is. And so even with humans, we experience where we've achieved all we want. It's like, what is my purpose past that? And we struggle with it. Even if you don't achieve, I mean, sometimes it's just like, what is my purpose? And you can't really understand that immediately. And so we seek religion, all sorts of stuff to try to...
So what is the purpose of life?
Right. And so for an AI system, like that then becomes interesting. Does it seek out religion?
Well, here's the answer.
Robots and churches, Jeff.
Yep.
I mean, here's a really dumbed down my perspective on what life is. Like, what is the purpose of life? And it honestly, when you think about it, it would be no different for an AI. It is the collection of perspectives. That's all.
Yep.
That's the whole purpose of life, is to collect perspective. And that's all. And I know that sounds really weird from a dumbed down perspective, but think about it. If an AI or a human, because our reward mechanisms are the exact same. If we are more useful, we make more money, we get to do more things, we get to experience more things. But wait, make more money to go experience more things. Why? Why do we want to experience more things? Why is that constantly calling us to experience more things? Doesn't make any sense. So an AI, which is then also its life source is being useful, is also going to do the exact same thing. It's also going to have it to where it seeks out new perspectives. So what you'll probably end up seeing in the far off, maybe 100, 200 years from now, is that you'll probably end up seeing these AI go into the Android formats and just like this, have it to where it's just trying to be able to see a different perspective. And that's where I ultimately see it doing that replication of basically spreading out, branching out, and then coming back together. And I think that is the purpose of life, is to be basically collect perspective.
Boy, we could go for another hour because I got a different perspective.
Well, what's yours?
I know.
I actually love that perspective. On the purpose of life. I think that, it comes down to beliefs, right? Personal beliefs and what you believe about like the formation of, is there an intelligent design behind our universe? And so for me, I very much believe in that. I don't think anything's by chance. I think that we were born with this unique thing called a soul, and that is tied to our purpose. And our purpose really comes down to who we were born on earth to impact and affect. And a lot of times that looks like pulling people up out of struggle, trauma, pain, being like the person in billions of people, there's like 8 billion people here on earth, being like that person, that cherry-picked person meant to meet that other person. And through that, like, empires are made, incredible things happen, generational curses are broken. And that is purpose when you go into like the meaning of the soul. And there's so much more to unpack there. I mean, this could be, like I mentioned, like another 2 hours, but I think that in that, changing and shifting perspectives is part of our calling. Like, I like that we don't have people on the show that just have the same beliefs we do. I wouldn't want that. I want to hear a different perspective because then that helps me grow in my own perspective. Mm-hmm. But that calling and who we touch is so important to me in particular. I wrote a memoir, been through some serious trauma, came out of it healed, didn't want to write a book. It's like, oh my gosh, really write a memoir about living in a cult? And then I did because I felt called to, not because I wanted to. And then it touched, it's touched over 1 million people. And so like that is something really special. And I think a lot of people don't find their calling, don't find their meaning. Those that do are lucky.
And it goes back to the pursuit of perspective is the meaning of life, because by having it to where you find that perspective, you can find joy, happiness, and also more value to help others. So you felt called to be able to share that perspective, which as a result ended up having it to where it helped so many people, which as a result gave you legacy, elation, dopamine, success, feeling of purpose deep in your soul. So is the soul's whole purpose is to collect perspective. And I think at the same token, I think the other side of life is the pursuit of fulfillment. And I think the pursuit of fulfillment is literally the pursuit of collecting perspectives in order to be able to, again, go back and be able to help everyone, be more useful.
Yeah. So attaching that like purpose to the perspective is like where I would add in, right? Because like you could get a new perspective if you do nothing with it.
It's pointless.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's like attaching that to your purpose and what you do is vital.
Exactly. And you can only find that purpose by getting more perspectives to allow you to be able to say, this is the one, this purpose, this thing, this perspective is the one I want to lead and share with more people. Because I feel like this is going to give them the greatest gain and me the biggest feeling of elation, dopamine, whatever chemical cocktail that is making my brain happy and fulfilling me at the core of who I am. And I feel like that exact thing is probably going to be replicated in AI.
Another hour.
It's been a crazy conversation. Just going, I started thinking back from like where we started. We're talking about like stocks.
This is what the show is all about. Just saying.
All the way to like where this is a rabbit hole.
It's ad libs.
I love it. I love it. I live for these conversations.
Where can people find you on the internet? Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, honestly, right now, Facebook is probably the easiest at Joseph Lazukin. I'm the only person in the world, I think, that has that name. So it's easiest way to be able to find me is Facebook. It's the only place that I really engage with people. You can add me on Instagram, but it's very rare that I'll end up actually checking it enough. So like, if you hit me there, you will get to me, but I might not see it for like 3, 4, 5 days because I don't care to indulge myself with too much social media. LinkedIn is like, I will never see it for like 3 weeks plus. But website-wise, for those that want to be able to, I guess, get a hold of my business or anything else like that, the most responsive one is through bankaccountbuilders.com, which is my agency side. And they can be able to reach out there if they want speaking engagements and all the other fun stuff, or just to get in touch and go on a podcast and talk for like 2-3 hours on the purpose of life and AI and everything. So
Coming to the next show near you.
Right.
Part 3 out of 3,000. I'm just kidding.
Well, it's been great to have you here, have you on the show. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me.
Yes. And thank you all for tuning in to Humanity Unchained. It's been another awesome episode with our special guest. And we'll see you on the next episode. Humanity Unchained is streaming on every platform you listen to.
And make sure to subscribe.
Thumbs up on that one.
Bye, everybody.